Hi, welcome to another episode of Django Chat. I'm Will Vincent, joined by Carlton Gibson. Hey, Carlton.
Hello, Will. How are you?
I'm marvelous.
Marvelous.
And
Good
we are
British
back
accent
from...
there. I love it.
Yeah, no R's allowed. Yep. We are both back from DjangoCon Europe in Dublin. So we're recording this to share our thoughts, share our emotions while it's still in our head, because I have like a sprint of things I want to do this week, because I always come out of conferences with lots of ideas and people to contact. But if I don't grab the bull by the horns right away, then the rest of the waves of work hit me. So I'm still, following up with people, writing things down. And then this hopefully is a good chance to save for posterity some of the takeaways from a really good almost week in Dublin.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. It's amazing. I'm still slightly hoarse in the throat from the last party night, where it was at quite a noisy venue, and so you had to speak up. And obviously,
yeah, there were bouncers. It was a whole thing.
It was full of young people, which was very strange. But all good. Yep. Anyway, Will, because you were it was in Ireland, so DjangoCon Europe was in Dublin this year, but you were there for some time before, no? You were acclimatized.
Yeah, so JetBrains sponsored me to go over because I was giving a keynote, which I'll mention. But the week before was school vacation week, so I was able to go with my family. So my wife and 3 young kids, and this is our first trip overseas. So it all was great. It was a little tiring, of course, but
yeah, obviously
we toured around mainly the southwest coast of the country. So we saw the Cliffs of Moher. We were in Killarney. Went to the Aran Islands. We did all the things. And then I dropped them off at the airport hotel, and in the midst of a thunderstorm, as often happens, picked you up from the terminal, and we took a cab down to the venue.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. It was very nice to come out, because it was quite late now. It's like, how am I going to get there? How am I going to get there? And then Will's there waiting to escort me to the right direction.
Yeah, you do a better job than I do of not delegating things, but I have a tendency to be all or nothing with things in group situations. So
there's no point multiple people being at the wheel, right? So if you're in charge, then you're in charge, and I'll just ride behind. If I need to be in charge, I can be, but I'd much rather someone else do it.
Yes. So then the flip side was, it was a bit late and tiring getting in. So I stayed at a hotel where the conference was happening, and you and Mariusz were a little bit ways away. But that first day started off, and this is a point I want to make. So we talk about how Kojo has this idea of self-care sprints, and I needed one that first night. So even though there's a party the first night, I just had dinner by myself, walked down to the water, had the first chance to be alone for over a week. And I so needed it. So like even multiple people the next day were like, "Oh, you seem a little more yourself."
Yeah, no, day 2 you did certainly turn up. You did turn up.
Yeah.
Much fresher.
Yeah. I just,
What's Kojo's line?
Yeah,
Kojo's line is that the self-care sprints are the sprints that let the other sprints happen.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think also this is not my first DjangoCon Europe even. It's my second, or certainly not my first DjangoCon US. And yeah, it is a sprint. Like I think that's a point I've made before, but it's worth repeating. That the first time I went to a conference, I met you, but I was speaking, and I sat through talks all day long. And that's great. Like, you should go to the talks. You should go to most of the talks. I went to most of the talks. But it's also about the hallway track. It's also about getting outside the venue from every now and then. And we're going to mention a couple of the more interesting interactions we had was, like the second day, you just given your talk, and we went to have a drink to celebrate. And then, met people who were also doing the same, and then saw them at the speaker's dinner later. So there's a mix of the technical and the talks, and then also just socializing with people who are doing things and contributing to Django.
Yeah, I mean, the talks aren't the same when you watch them on the video, right? If you watch the talk live, you're involved, you see the speaker, you interact with the speaker, there's the Q&As afterwards. They are much more vibrant, but you can watch the talks on YouTube later on. So with that second afternoon, I'd given my talk. I was exhausted. I was like, no, okay. It was a lot of work to write. Stupid me, I gave a community talk. I always think they're a million times harder than a technical talk. So I must have been.
That's the thing. Yeah.
I must have been writing it thinking about it for like 4 months. It must have taken me literally a week, an entire week to write. Like, if you add up all the hours.
So, mhm.
And so the talk's gone over. It's gone over quite well. It's like, whew, then release. I just need to decompress after that. So I can't, I sat through Karen's talk afterwards, which was very good actually on debugging and production. Karen Tracy, who's always just knocks it out of the park.
Yep.
But I couldn't carry on that afternoon. I need to just chat to people. I need to relax. I need to just, be in a slightly different space. So the hallway chat is perfect. Then you have serendipitous conversations. And part of the reason to turn up is the conversations, right? It's the meeting the people, whether the old people that you've met before or the new people that you meet that first time. It's like that deeper, that deepening that reaction. Sometimes you've seen work with them online, right? Jacob Wells, who's a big contributor now in Django. He's on the triage and review team, I think, but he's a regular contributor. I'd never met him. And so to actually, say, oh, you, and several people like that. So anyway, yes, the hallway track.
Yeah. And I think also it's really the second or third time you're at a conference when it hits its peak of, because the first time you meet people for the first time, you have the getting to know them talks, which is great. But, once you know them, you're already following them online. The next year when you see them, you can just jump right into like, oh, like Carlton, I saw you've been working on paths and like, well, let's talk about it. Right. Or whatever it is. Right. There's less of the getting to know people stuff, but there's still also, I think, especially at DjangoCon Europe, there's a lot of people who it's their first DjangoCon. Like there was a woman I met who's using Django and Python and doing stuff with like mirrors for the European Space Agency and like all this, interesting stuff, doing data science and web. Like there's such an interesting mix of the regulars, new people. Yeah, it's great. There's, if you can possibly attend, I highly recommend it. And even as there's a little bit of, jet lag and definitely cost, to be fair, something good always comes out of it. This podcast came out of it, So
I mean, it's hard work, right? Because you have to travel there. Wherever you've come from, you've had to travel there. So that's a day, or at the least, it's a full day that it's going to take you to get there. And then it's probably quite a late evening because you'll go to the social and you'll stay up a bit later than you had. And it's an early start. And then, well, okay, day one, fine, day two, day three. And then by the time you reach the sprint, you're like, okay, I'm really wringing it dry now.
Well, and that's the thing. The sprints are, if you can stay from the sprints are the best part because then you have it's smaller groups, it's less intense, but you still, can go get dinner, have chats and work on Django or whatever it is you want to work on. But, you weren't able to really, you just attended the morning. I wasn't really able to attend
stay for the first day.
That's fine.
I mean, I left mid-afternoon on the first day. And
but that's true. I'm sorry, you stayed longer. Yeah.
Well, but I would have stayed for the 2 days, but with the travel and with the kids at home and all the rest, it doesn't work. But that, if you could stay to the end, then you do get the kind of extra couple of evenings, which are much quieter, and you get to have much deeper conversations. And then at the sprints, that's when you'll chat, there'll be really established contributors there. And you get to have really in-depth conversations about really specific things. And it'll be like, we've had Florian on the show. So I asked Florian, can you review this PR? Is this going to be the one, and he can then give his opinion and that. And it just helps to set I've just picked Florian out there because I had that one particular, but, lots of contributors. And it just helps to set the agenda for going forward. We've got a short list of possibles. And then by having those deeper conversations, you can really narrow it down and get more focus. And so I never get anything done at the sprints. I always turn up. I've got these grand ideas. Like, I'm going to look at these PRs. I managed to get my bus ticket booked. That's about all. But I had the conversations.
Yeah, well, it plants the seed for everything else. And I think there's this nice rhythm to, you go to conferences and you see everyone and, have to speak loudly at whatever parties. And then we all go back to our respective caves and, it's in a more measured pace, but still with that enthusiasm around not just Django, but whatever we're working on or new ideas. I mean, I have so many new, so I gave a talk on Django for data science that
not just a talk, you gave a keynote.
Oh yeah, excuse me, keynote. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I learned a lot doing that talk, and then people came up to me like, "'Cause I want to do the next version already." So that spurred so many interesting conversations, which, in the moment I can't do anything with, but I have all these long lists of like, packages and ways people are doing things. As well as, so again, JetBrains sponsored me to go, which I'm very grateful for. JetBrains launched while I was on vacation the week before, this huge new AI push for us, so an integrated AI chat assistant and our own agent, Junie. And it was great that I was on vacation when all that happened. So like I actually got a little bit of a break, when it's not just me doing everything as it has been the last few years. It's nice to be part of a team. But it's also, I got to have so many conversations with people just about, about PyCharm. I mean, unsurprisingly, there's a lot of users around PyCharm just being like, tell me what you think, or whatever they're using, right? Or like, oh, like why do you like this IDE text editor? And that's stuff that I then can take, so I then talk to our product teams and share. And I think, one of the interesting things is most people are, so we working on the product, we see and share, when someone says something horrific on Reddit or on pick a social, and it can, internally working on a product, it can feel like people hate it. But the reality is, like, the only people who take the time to post things on socials generally are at one extreme or another, and they're usually on the negative stream. And so the fact that I was able to have and share with our product team, quite a number of people came up to me just uninvited and said, yeah, like I'm really liking PyCharm, or like I've been doing the early access program for the agent and it's really working well for me. And then I was like, ooh, tell me more, because, I've been pushing the limits and I'm trying to understand, how I can showcase what it can and can't do. That's the real world, right? Is that people, somewhere in between, but people are a lot more positive than, again, what we see. So it's very helpful that I can bring that back to our internal group.
And the negative griping, like those who are on social media are all the more kind to be negative and criticize. And, my talk had a very similar point to make about the Django community, in that the visible Django community is probably, at best estimates, about 0.1% of the total user base. And so when we have these blog posts of criticizing, Django's, these are early adopters who are desperate to push forward. And we're not taking into account those are legitimate criticisms. Yeah, there's things that we need to do. Yeah, there are challenges we face. But the reality is that Django's doing a great job for the 99.9% who never post and never say, oh, no, I really need, if we don't integrate with React within the next cycle, Django's dead. No, it's not.
Yeah. Well, and I often think there's two things. When someone says something really negative, I appreciate the fact that they're almost always talking about something. There's something there, right?
Yeah.
So and it plants the seed, or it starts a conversation around how to improve it. But then you sort of have to ignore the tone, because somebody who's really worked out, they care about it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of person who, if you can solve it for them, they'll be all the more, they want you to solve it. That's why they're doing it, right? So like, you can feel a little bit like, ugh, like when you have a bunch of issues or you put a lot into it. But I don't know if it comes from a good place, but it's a positive thing. You just have to separate the emotion that you feel as a human being in the moment from, no, there's something there to investigate and decide how it fits with the priorities internally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They've hit on something, but it's their reactive negative brain which is firing it. And it's like, okay, like try and take the kernel of truth from the thing they've identified without engaging with the reactivity. And that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. And it was also good to see that, so MongoDB had a table there. I think they're the only one who had a table there, but got the chance to talk with the team there. Their developer advocate, she gave a talk.
Yeah.
But also she mentioned in her talk, this was kind of nice to see. Like I was messaging you during it, that the Django developers survey, which is one of the things I worked on the board, had questions around databases. And I think she cited that 8% of people said that they used Mongo, which seems quite high, but, so out of however many thousands of responses, if you extrapolate that out to the larger millions of users, Mongo internally was able to help use that to justify this new push for this official backend. And we had a interview with Jib about it. But, these small things, it's gratifying, right? To see small things and effort just to support Django or whatever it is, years later, they don't lead themselves, but they help these things come about, right? So it's always, There's always something positive there, and and then sometimes I had a thought. I would love to do one of these. Soft talks are hard and hard talks are soft. So like these non-technical talks, to your point, like it's much easier to give a technical talk, but I love the soft talks. I especially like your ones. I would love to do something around not avoiding the Django meat grinder, but like the valleys and mountaintops of it, right? Where, you know, sometimes you're super involved and then you're less involved. But you don't have to go away. If you need to, you can.
Yeah.
Right. And like, both of us, but especially you've done that where you had a year post fellow and now you're on the steering council. And, the just to understand that there's a life cycle to it and it's not just you, like it's normal. Like this week, right? I'm just like, it's normal for me to feel tired and jet lagged. And it's not that I feel that way about whatever it is I'm doing this week. It's just like, no, I just had an intense 2-3 weeks. And
yeah, it's a tag.
That's not really how I feel.
It's got to be a tag team, not a battle royale, right? You can't be in there the whole time. You've got to tag out, take your downtime, come back in later. Even now, so with the steering council, we've had a busy beginning. We're coming to the point where our initial goals of we're kind of, those plans are filling out, and okay, so then it should be that as a steering council, we can step back slightly and just help steer the technical direction of Django, rather than having to work on the contributing process and the ecosystem page. And those things should fall into place over the next, little while. And then it should be a bit more time for us to just back away, because the steering council doesn't need to be in there every week working really hard, because that's not sustainable over, the 2.5-year cycle.
Right. And you have been with this new, new group, and
yeah, we've been meeting every week, and we've been really, working hard. And like as I say, my talk was a big commitment. And so part of me is very much now looking forward to just stepping back, hiding back in my cave, just a teeny bit. I'm not going, I'm still on the steering council, still got work to do, but I'm going to step back into my cave just a teeny bit and work on async over the summer,
Yeah. Well, and I think probably for you, there's already been a recap someone wrote about DjangoCon Europe, and I'm sure there'll be more, people seeing Neapolitan for the first time, right? And
yeah,
this
that
is just
got
that
mentioned.
Point that,
that got mentioned in other people's talks.
Well, because, so there's a degree of people who just haven't seen it. Most people haven't seen it.
No,
or people who've seen it now, maybe they're finally, using it, and, it's spreading.
Well, let's
right?
say I stand up
Whatever
on stage
pace.
and say, hey, I've done this thing called Neapolitan. And then someone might go home, they might try it. It might take them ages to work into the work project, right? It's not you can't just rewrite your project in.
Right. As opposed to like multiple people saying, oh, this is this package that, trusted members working on. And this is how I'm using it to help my work. I mean, that was the thing. There's, the talks run the gambit of things. I really liked the talks of, we're using Django to solve this problem at work. And there were a couple of those, Tim Bell gave one at Kraken about database migrations.
Migrating foreign key fields or primary key fields from
from integer to big int, I think,
at scale without downtime. It was a great talk. One of my favorites.
Yeah. And then
there were 3 database
Haki
talks.
Benita gave a talk on.
Go on.
Gave a talk, and and this is a point to make too, that when we go to the conferences, because of this podcast, some people come up to us, but like we're fanboys too. Like I guess he's been out there a while, but I didn't know what he looked like. I'd never heard him speak. Like I've been reading his stuff for forever.
Yeah,
I remember being like, oh, like who's this legend coming out of the woodwork, and and then see his talk, and then we saw him at the social, and you get to get a sense of the person, and it's great. It fills in the whole picture of people in the community, I guess.
Yeah, no, I was really, when I saw him, I was like, oh, it's Haki. I've been reading his blog for a decade.
Yeah. Oh, and I did want to shout out, so the first night thing, that was technically a Django social event that Foxley Talent, so John Gould and Liam, they threw that on. So I don't think that was officially through the conference, but
no, but it was a good thing to do.
Unofficially,
there wasn't anything that night, and so they organised a Django social. It was just like, and all it really is we're going to be here, come here. But it's an opportunity to say, especially in a city the size of Dublin, where it's not likely that you would bump into other conference attendees by accident. unless you were very near
No.
the venue or something like that. But in the centre of Dublin, you're not going to meet conference attendees by accident. So to just say we're going to be in a place, it gives people a place to head to. And then I had some really great conversations. Again, it was a little bit noisy for my old ears.
Well, what else? What other talks jumped out at you? Because I think you got to go to a couple more than me, because I was speaking the last day, so it's sort of, I had to skip a couple to work on my slides.
Yeah, the trouble with whenever your talk is, you can't really sit back and enjoy the conference until your talk is over. So ideally, you want the first talk because it's the most stress.
Yeah, you want to be.
It's out of the way.
Sarah Boyce, just like, first one, and then you're done. Yeah.
So I was second day mid-morning. So by lunchtime, second day, I was like, okay, it's done. But you weren't till the third day, yeah. So my three favourite ORM talks. There were 3 ORM talks that were really good. Tim's that you've mentioned, Hackey's that you mentioned, then Karen Jex, who's from Crunchy Data, who keynoted last year in Vigo. She gave another just amazing talk about the internals of a Postgres operation. So when you do a select or an insert or whatever, what actually happens? And it was just so perfectly pitched, because obviously it's really, really, really complex. And she explained it really, really well. And I was going through, and it got to that point where the database is fetching pages of data from the disk. And I was just starting to phase out. I was a bit like, no, I'm getting lost. And then that was like the high watermark for complexity. And I was like, oh, phew, he's coming. But it was just perfectly pitched. It was a really good talk. So I love that one. Yeah. What else? Agnes Hasser gave a talk on multi-factor auth, which I thought was really well done. I much more understand the passkey signing algorithm now, because she used different sunglasses and putting them on and off, and I was like, okay, these are the different roles in the algorithm. Graham Knapp did one on feature flags, and there were like just loads. These were the ones that kind of stood out to me. But again, every day the lightning talks were just, there was some absolutely genius
lightning talks were so good. I mean, and Daniele gave an amazing, like, if you're going to be like, what's a Hall of Fame lightning talk? Someone, I forget which person did it, but they had a point about, why give a lightning talk? Maybe it was the one where they used AI, but they were saying, it's short enough. You don't have to take questions, but also like you have to get to the point right away.
Yeah.
Which is sort of a developer mindset sort of thing.
Sort of just long enough to show some expertise, but not long enough to, for your bluff to be exposed.
Have to handle questions. Yeah. Yeah. Let me think. Highlights. I'll just call out a couple. So Jacob Brief had the end-to-end testing with PyTest and Playwright.
Yes.
That was he did a really good job with it. And also, I have really not used Playwright much myself. So I'm going to rewatch that. And I thought he made a lot of good points too about, PyTest versus Django tests. And I think I'm like you. I still am fine using Django tests, but I understand that if I was working on a larger code base, like there's a ton of reasons why PyTest is, I think, the dominant pattern. So he gave some context on that, and I thought that was really interesting. And then, of course, Adam Johnson had his data-oriented Django Dre. That's German for 3. Sorry, I say that wrong.
The third edition of this. So he did one in Porto, one in Vigo, and he's done one in
part deux, and so I don't know what language the next one will be. But yeah, so many good ones. And then there was I guess the first day there was the Django Software Foundation had a board Q&A.
Yes, which was very good.
So they both, the main hall for talks, but there's also a separate one for workshops. And so this was in a workshop. And I'm really excited what the board's doing, and that there's new people and, executive director, maybe, kind of, sort of. They're doing things around Django 20th. The Django blog is, more and more people are writing. Like, it just seems like there's a lot of good energy in that direction. And there were 3 board members, or 3 or 4. There was Thibaut, there was 4, right? So Thibaut, Tom Carrick, and Sarah,
and Paolo.
Sarah A. were there. And then Paolo, I think, wasn't speaking, but he was in the room. So 4 of the 7 in one room. So
they didn't pass any, stealth changes to the DSF bylaws while they had a quorum without anyone to object.
I don't think so. But if you wanna get something into Django, come show up. Ooh, and I did want to call out Mia's keynote the second day. So the most bizarre software bugs in history. This was a great talk, and it was such a spectrum of what a keynote could be, because it was very much, I would say, like a TEDx, like I don't think there was any code actually shown, but it was all about code and about, software bugs over history and communication, and just set a really good, engaging, beautiful slides template for what a keynote could be. And and then there was mine, which is sort of in between, where it was like a mix of technical. I did talk through some slides, but then also trying to do context. And you had several people, but you especially had some really good ideas around ways I can show more of the data science going forward, which I think would be really helpful to people to understand, like, well, what does it mean to train a model? Because there's all these there's a number of off the shelf ways to do it that are not that hard, but give a sense of the patterns. And I talked a little bit about how, why would you choose one data set over another, because like, so we used Iris, which there's no fitting problems, but Titanic has like just enough fitting problems. So I could already see a second talk or videos on all this. So
I think particularly for a web audience, that you just, like, you showed training the model with scikit-learn. And scikit-learn is doing an awful lot. It gave you the algorithm. You showed training it, but I not to criticize at all, but I think there was a good space there that could have been like, look, scikit-learn gives you all of these algorithms, and the trick is not that you have to know the maths. You have to kind of understand which ones are appropriate when. And there's probably half a dozen that are genuinely useful, or the bog standard cases,
and maybe even less. That I mean, I think it's interesting to know these are, like I mentioned, like training and testing where you split things up, and how 80/20. So like that's what we use. That's a default. But you could do 90/10 or 70/30 depending on how loose or strict you want to be, and there's pros and cons there. Like I do think there's something helpful to being a little hand wavy, but just super contexty, right? Because the details are fun and we all get lost in them. But like, what are the foundational things of training a model, or even making the point that what is machine learning versus data science? And machine learning is when you give it the inputs, you give it the answer, and the scikit-learn, the computer figures out its own logic for it. That's what makes it machine learning. You could also just decipher things and find patterns yourself. So that was part of the talk too, is that data science is just a umbrella term for a whole bunch of disciplines.
So
ML is one thing, LLMs are another.
Are LLMs data science, or they will be when the hype dies down?
Yeah, and what's AI? Yeah. I mean, and I shared, I had a version of the talk where I was going to do more about LLMs in particular, because there's so, many people are using them every day. I mean, I'm using one every day. And yet, vibe coding, I can't help but be offended by the term. And I think it was helpful, talking to other professional developers. Like, there's clearly something there, but only somebody who's deeply ignorant would say it's going to replace programmers. In the same way that somebody who says AI is going to replace doctors has never sat in a doctor's office and tried to have a patient explain what the problem is, because guess what? They often can't even come close to explaining what the problem is. And it's like, if you've ever sat in a meeting, like, even if you said, oh, you have this perfect AI that can write the perfect Django code, you can't get people to agree on what they want, even if they could do the code. Like that's what the real world is like. So there's something there, and it's really interesting, and there's it's changing. But yeah, just a side rant. I'm vibe coding. But I don't know. But it just pushes the debugging problem later on, which is more work for Django consultancies, I guess. But
yeah, and you're meant to push it to the left. You're meant to push the debugging earlier. So Anyway, I have nothing really to add here. We've said this loads of times. And they're clearly useful, but I don't yet feel for my job security.
No. What else? This wasn't meant to be a super long episode.
It might just be a really short one. I mean, what can I say?
Us.
The other thing was, because in Dublin, the conference was slightly out of town. We were staying in town. We ended up getting the bus in. And so the bus became part of the mini social event as well. There's everyone up the back on the top. So it's double deckers up the top, on the back, like it's school.
The buses are great in Dublin. I wish, part of it is they don't have a subway system in Dublin, or indeed, I guess, all of Ireland. But the buses are great. They're very regular. I mean, yeah, the bus to the airport. I was telling my wife, oh my God, if there was like a direct bus to get to the airport from places within Boston, as it is now, I can take public transport to get to the bus, but it's like 2 different subway lines plus a dedicated bus. Like, it takes forever.
There are different social models.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't, yeah. And it was nice to be in a room where, there's not that many Americans, because it's DjangoCon Europe. So that perspective, coupled with my day job, um, I definitely appreciate that. But, I would say if anyone's curious, I sort of expected to get more political questions from people about, like, hey, what's going on with your country? And I got almost none. If I wanted to talk about it, I could. But, I think maybe people in Europe or other countries are more familiar with this idea of not everyone identifies exactly with whatever your government in power is doing. So, yeah, that was not really an issue at all. Just in case anyone's curious.
Yeah, it's quite as well. You don't want to put a total downer on things all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we'll link to some posts on this in the Django newsletter. Definitely will feature all the talks when they come out. The last thing I want to say is I got a chance to talk to the organizers and just thank them, because I think it's so much work to do these conferences. I every time I go to another one, I start to appreciate even more how much work it is for the lead organizers, but people just volunteering at check-in, all the rest. It's also a great way to meet people to volunteer, but I do recommend people take a moment to thank the organizers for all the hard work.
Yeah, and this team in particular have been just outstanding. They've done, they were organizing Porto before the pandemic. The pandemic came, so that didn't happen. They did 2 years online. They did Porto. They've done Vigo. They didn't do Edinburgh. They did Vigo. They've now done Dublin. They're now so they, just absolutely, rocks that the conference has lent on over that really difficult period. They're stepping back slightly. They're still doing PyCon Portugal. So, if you fancy, a bit of Python in Portugal, sunny Portugal, then do look up for that. But I was talking to David Vass, who's one of the team, and he was very much we're still available to be around and to help people who come, to give our expertise and our experience to the people who come up next.
Yeah, which is huge, because in the US, there is the DEFNA, the Django Events Foundation of North America, which is a group that has existed to support and sometimes run conferences. And there wasn't really a European equivalent. And this isn't formalized, but effectively they've kind of stepped into that role of providing that continuity. And
there's now
I'm just grateful for their work.
The DjangoCon Europe support group, which is there to sort of try and formalize the support working group, which is there to try and formalize this as we go forward. What they have around DjangoCon US and DEFNA is a lot of institutional knowledge, and that isn't institutionalized in the European. There are people who've done it and there are people who know, but until it's sort of somehow institutionalized, until it's made slightly more formal, the danger is that it can drop through the gaps, and then we have a continuity problem. So hopefully that can be. But again, there are a couple of pitches in this year. There's, I spoke to the conference from people from multiple cities who are keen to, try and put forward a proposal. So, it seems like a really good and healthy time. I think, again, with the DSF, you were talking about the DSF meetings and talks around the DSF, they were really positive. And you think, I think we've finally come out of the lull that we had after the pandemic. I think it really was the pandemic. And it's just taken a few years to recover. And it was also
a generational change of a sort, not necessarily by age, but just by involvement.
At the same time.
Coming to fruition. So
anyway,
good.
Come on, we've ran. This was just supposed to be a quick recap. Let's let them go, get their coffee or whatever it is they're missing.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for listening. We have a couple more this spring. Then we're taking the summer off per usual, and we'll be back in the fall with more episodes. So DjangoChat.com, and we'll see everyone next time.
Join us next time. Bye-bye.